So here's what we've been doing. We've been working through the Psalms, not like psalm by psalm, but as categorized in a way. We've been working with this book. This is Walter Brueggemann's Message of the Psalms, and he is one of the church's best thinkers. I mean, just truly phenomenal. And so I've been relying heavily on his work. This was written 30 years ago, and if you write anything on the Psalms today, you still have to wrestle with his work 30 years ago. So it's held some time. The Psalms were written a few years before that, and one of the things that are so amazing about the Psalms is that they give us sort of this full expression of faith. They move us through the ups, they move us through the down times, they help us understand new life, they help us find that difficult moment and give voice to tragedy, give voice to sorrow, give voice to doubt and frustration and anger. They also give voice to the excitement of God, to the joy and the understanding of God as creator and sustainer of all things. They allow us to reorient ourselves after we've been through struggle. This is sort of a classic case in speech communication classes. They will sometimes tell you, you go tell them what you're going to say, and then you say it, and then you tell them again. And so we're going to do a little bit of that today and through the series. But here's where we've been. We started with the Psalms of orientation. This is Walter Brueggemann's words, orientation. And all that is saying is that when everything makes sense, you can worship God and the world makes sense, your life makes sense, creation makes sense, looking around at the sustainer of the universe makes sense. All of these things fit. That's the way to put it. They fit. Those Psalms tell us a lot and give us expression that we need to be able to voice. And when people talk about the Psalms, almost always they are telling you to go look at those Psalms of orientation and let it just soak in. So if you're in a hard time, you can take this brilliantly joyful praise of God and help pull you out. But what they don't talk about is the next stage of your faith journey. And this is what's interesting about the Psalms, is that they travel through our faith journey. And the next stage is that moment of disorientation. You lose a job. You lose a loved one. You read a new scripture that doesn't fit in your theology or your framework for faith. You run into some scientific evidence that combats how you understand the Bible or how you understand God. You're faced with some other kind of tragedy or moment of loss or what, like on and on, right? These are the moments of disorientation, and the Psalms gives us that voice too. And this is what's amazing about this, because we don't like to express that. We don't like to sit in that moment. Carolyn was talking about our sad songs. We don't like to sit there. And so we haven't had a really easy time finding sorrowful songs to sing, because there aren't a lot of them that in our sort of Christian worship music that fit that. But with that disorientation, there is, I hesitate to say this, but I'm going to use it anyway, always an upswing at some point. We look through some of these Psalms of disorientation, and there's a moment, there's a shift, and you don't know how long the waiting period is. You don't know if something shifted in their mind or if something shifted in the community or if something changed in their way of life, or God fixed a problem, you don't really know. And you don't know how long it took. It could have taken years. It could have taken 15 minutes. It could have taken a decade. But at some point, there's a shift, and they move into a moment of good news or a moment of new orientation. And that's where we're moving today. One writer puts the Psalms, and they said, the Psalms express the fullness of our faith, or the full expressions of our faith. And goes another step further to say that the Psalms express the fullness of the gospel. And that's just a church word for the good news. The Psalms express the fullness of the good news. And remember, they're written before Jesus shows up. And so it's kind of interesting to place that term there. But the reality is that you see the full cycle of faith, the journey that happens. And if you've been around for a long time, you've watched that journey occur. You've hit the low times, and you've seen God speak or act in new ways that gave you a new framework to live. And that's where we're going to sit today. So we're kind of in a happy, joyful kind of space. Not like everything's perfect, like, man, I can't believe God brought me through this kind of space. Hey, welcome back.
We had a first meeting, I'm sorry.
So here's what we're going to do with this new orientation. What is amazing about this, I love this moment, because what happens, and a lot of the Psalms are not so much about whether you sit in one of these spaces or another. They're about the movement from one space to another. And so you don't always sit in orientation. Sometimes you're sitting in the moment of shift from orientation to disorientation, where something doesn't look quite right, and you're calling on God to say, come solve this problem for me. Come fix what's wrong in my life, because what is happening now doesn't fit with my faith. And then that moment of shift from disorientation is truly a moment when things start to click. I'm not entirely sure how to express that, which is going to make this an awkward message, right? But that shift happens when you see God in a new light, or you experience God in a new place, or you fit new pieces to the text to make that scripture that was out of place sort of come back in line in a new way. And it's new orientation, not a reorientation, because there's a shift that's happened. If you go through a struggle, or if you have a dark moment, or if you're in pain, when you come out of that, things are different. You don't unsee that tragedy. You don't undo that dark space and the anger, of frustration of life or of God or whatever that is. You have some new concept or way of looking at God that helps give meaning to that dark moment. It's not the same as before. It is new. It is fresh. So that's the attempt there to explain that moment. Last week I told you a story. I told you about sort of the big, I don't know if you can call it the big disorientation moment of my life, but what happened is quite literally, I experienced a concentration camp in Germany in the dead of winter, and struggled to piece that together with my faith. It didn't make sense. It wasn't my own tragedy. It wasn't my own loss. It was truly trying to understand how God fits into a world with Nazi Germany. How God fits into a world with such pain and suffering of people who follow and worship, as we would say, the same God that we do. And my faith tradition told me, basically, it doesn't really matter. You're supposed to live with God's decisions of saved and unsaved and where you're going to go. I'm not going to get into that, but that's what my faith tradition did to me. So in that moment, my answer was supposed to be, what the framework told me Well, they didn't know Jesus. And I'm supposed to live with these people suffering in pain and faithful to God to the end. If you read some of the stories and some of the moments of these people who suffered. And I'm supposed to be okay with that. And I told you further that it took not a few days, but months for me to come out of that. And that moment of coming out wasn't a quick thing. It was a total rebuild of my faith. It was a complete rebuild of my theology. I started from the ground up. And to this day, I will tell you, when you ask me, I start my faith with the moment of creation. And I don't mean in a Genesis 1 moment. I mean, well, kind of. But what I mean is that God chooses for us to be in existence. God chooses to share, this is a weird word, but share life with us. That is pure grace. It is a pure gift. There is nothing more to that. And so when I broke everything down and nothing made sense, I came back to this moment where I could look up into the mountains and I could look up around the world and see the faces around me, and I could go, okay, so this is a gift. I'm going to take another breath right now, and this is a gift. And I saw that breath in a new light. I saw that moment in a new space, in something that changed. It's not the old orientation. It is something new and fresh, a new framework for how I viewed God and how I understood how God acted in our world. It was not overnight. And there were a lot of big questions, a lot of doubt, a lot of struggle, and that's part of the disorientation process. It's part of what made me stronger, what made my relationship with God stronger. And when I come out of it, life has light again. The moment, here we are back to the song. In the deadness of everything, we are reborn in that light. And that is the moment of new orientation that Brueggemann talks about in the Psalms. So I want to look at a couple of Psalms this morning that sort of express this moment of transition. And I invite you along the way, we're going to do some where we're just listening and hearing those words and letting them sort of fall on us and experience that. I invite you to think through maybe where you're at right now, maybe where you've been in the past, where you have seen that shift happen, and identify that and give words to it. Give voice to that moment when things change. When finally you're able to go, for me, this was another moment when you're able to go, oh, it doesn't matter how God created the world. Those are the moments, right? So we're going to look first at Psalm 30. And there is a mix here. And so we could look at this. This is always a perspective, sort of. We could look at this as a sort of a psalm of orientation, but we see the transition of somebody experiencing the movement or God pulling them out of that dark moment. And it begins, I will exalt you, Lord, for you lifted me out of the depths and did not let my enemies gloat over me. Lord my God, I called to you for help, and you healed me. You, Lord, brought me up from the realm of the dead. You spared me from going down to the pit. Sing the praises of the Lord, you his faithful people. Praise his holy name, for his anger lasts only a moment, but his favor lasts a lifetime. Weeping may stay for the night, but rejoicing comes in the morning. And so you see in these poetic terms, you see the shift and the recognition that it's not all sun. Or if you're a farmer, it's not all rain. This is the recognition that God pulls us out of that. Now, when we only let this psalm speak to us, we may miss the moment of the Psalms of disorientation, allowing us to be present in the darkness. And we have a tendency when a friend is struggling to say, yeah, but look at Psalm 30. See, it's just the night, and in the morning, God's going to fix it. Or it only lasts a moment. And we try to speak these words to someone that may or may not be ready. And it's really, really difficult for us to let somebody be in the place of disorientation and not try to tell them, it's coming. Just snap out of it. Just walk it off. Just figure it out. Just listen to 30 and not 88, which we looked at last week. I want to highlight verses 11 and 12 here. You turned my wailing into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, that my heart may sing your praises and not be silent. Lord my God, I will praise you forever. You turned my wailing into dancing. I love that moment. And that's the moment that we're talking about in this new orientation, when life has all of a sudden a second breath, when life has a light at the end of the tunnel, and that moment, and you go, all of this sort of makes sense now. We do it in a lot of ways. We look at some really, really hard times, and we will explain how God tested us. Paul does this a little bit. We do it a lot. We will explain how God was strengthening us. We will explain how we're able now to speak new life into the lives of others because we have this experience. All of those are ways for us to find this new orientation, to seek God in those moments of darkness, let God meet us there, and then find our way to crawl out. That's the beauty of these Psalms of new orientation. This next one I want to look at is Psalm 40. And it's a bit long, but we're going to read the whole thing. Just a note about verse 1. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned me and heard my cry. So that waited patiently sounds like a nice Christian way to say, it was really, really difficult for a really long time, and I stuck it out and I figured out how to wait. It's kind of a poor translation. The better statement, this is, if you're a grammar person, this is an infinitive absolute, and there's a better way to translate it, and that sounds like this. I hope intensely for the Lord. I hope intensely for the Lord. And I think about those moments of disorientation, and I think that's a better description of waiting and hoping and passionately hoping that God is going to make that change, that God is going to bring that shift, that somehow this is all going to make sense again. So let's just listen for a minute. Again, excuse me. Again, it is a bit lengthy, but just let the words flow. I mean, this is part of what the beauty of the Psalms are. And sometimes I think we do this with everything, but we do too much talking and not enough just hearing the words. I hoped intensely for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. Blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord, who does not look to the proud, to those who turn aside to false gods. Many, Lord, my God, are the wonders you have done, the things you planned for us. None can compare with you. Were I to speak and tell of your deeds, they would be too many to declare. Sacrifice and offerings you did not desire, but my ears you have opened. Burnt offerings and sin offerings you did not require. Then I said, here I am, I have come. It is written about me in the scroll. I desire to do your will, my God. Your law is within my heart. I proclaim your saving acts in the great assembly. I do not seal my lips, Lord, as you know. I do not hide your righteousness in my heart. I speak of your faithfulness and your saving help. I do not conceal your love and your faithfulness from the great assembly. Do not withhold your mercy from me, Lord. May your love and faithfulness always protect me. For troubles without number surround me. My sins have overtaken me and I cannot see. They are more than the hairs of my head, and my heart fails within me. Be pleased to save me, Lord. Come quickly, Lord, to help me. May all who want to take my life be put to shame and confusion. May all who desire my ruin be turned back in disgrace. May those who say to me, aha, aha, be appalled at their own shame. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who long for your saving help always say, the Lord is great. But as for me, I am poor and needy. May the Lord think of me. You are my help and my deliverer. You are my God. Do not delay. And so you see this sort of shift, this sort of back and forth from this merciful, unfailing God who loves incessantly to please help me. Please find me in this moment and bring me out. The other thing I like about this psalm is the movement from rejoicing and thankfulness into a movement of action. So, verse 6, the sacrifice and offerings you didn't desire. But verse 7, and I said, here I am. In verse 8, I desire to do your will. In verse 9, I proclaim to share that with everyone, and you know my lips are not sealed. And so in the midst of this moment where the world looks new, where the world looks fresh, where you can build your faith back from the ground up, starting wherever you start when you do that. You say, well, now I have to do something about that. God has given me this breath. God is going to give me the next one. And I should probably respond to that gift. And so there's an action involved. I think about maybe my favorite story in the Bible, maybe. It's in John, and there's some Pharisees, there's some religious elites that have found and caught this woman in adultery. And it's not really about her, it's about Jesus. They bring her to him to say, this is what's happened. What should we do with her? You tell us. Because the Torah would tell you, actually, that she should be stoned. She should be put to death. And they know that Jesus isn't going to respond that way. So they're attempting to trap him in this moment. And in this most beautiful of stories, this woman in truly a moment of disorientation, of disgrace, of being brought to the limelight in a very dark moment. And Jesus kneels down beside her, serves as an advocate for her, shows his love and his care for her, and speaks truth to those religious elites that have brought her here. And you know the words probably. Any of you who are without sin, you may throw the first stone. And one by one, they figure out what's going on and that they can't throw that first stone. And they walk away. And so in this dark moment, she is given new life. She is given a new orientation, a new way to view the world, a new way to see God, as well as each of those religious elites that have brought her. And often, I don't like to finish the story. But here's the finish of the story. Jesus says, go. And with that new orientation, with that new understanding of God's love, with that new look on life that brought light to this moment of darkness, go and sin no more. Take action. And if we follow the Psalm 40, there is action. There is a response to that moment of grace. There is a response to that moment, that gift. And then there is a sharing of that story. There's a sharing of God's love. There is an expression that is so new and fresh that you can't not share it. I read a book recently that really got me excited. It was intriguing, it was fresh, it was something new. It explored some areas of faith that I hadn't seen before, that I hadn't thought about, and I started talking about it to everyone. And Jenna's tired of hearing about it. I had to start calling people and say, hey, I know you've read this. Can we get together for coffee and just talk about like what this means and what we're supposed to do next? You can't stop because there is some sort of new life in that moment of new orientation. Not that I felt like I was in a disorientation, but it was new and fresh, and I just had to follow that. I said, here I am. I have come, it is written about me. I desire to do your will. I proclaim your saving acts. And I could not seal my lips. This is why you say that the Psalms express the fullness of the gospel, of the good news. Because in that story is also the story, in this poem is also the story of that woman being brought to Jesus. It is each of our stories in this moment when God lets go of all the things that are broken and gives new life to everything we couldn't put words to or understand or make fit. That's why the Psalms of New Orientation are so exciting. And I told you when we started, I said, I kind of felt like I needed to do the Psalms because I want to provide sort of a sweeping overview. If you're here regularly, that you get sort of an overview of the text. And I felt like I should do the Psalms. And then I started thinking more and more about it and getting excited. And we launched with Inside Out and that expression and the sometimes the purpose or meaning found in darkness. And all of this excitement is found in that new orientation. And it's not just a book of quips and moments of joy for you to turn to and say, I'm going to be happy today because Psalms 1 tells me that. It is this full journey with God. And even in the process of putting these messages together, I find in that moment of Psalm 40 my own new orientation. And that's the joy of that faith journey. So I invite you this week to think about, what does that look like for me? And if I'm sort of in that moment of orientation, of sort of the status quo, what do I need to do to energize and find that moment that I can't not share, that I cannot seal my lips? What does that look like? Is it a book? Is it a person? Is it prayer or meditation or some journey into the woods? I don't know. That's different for each of us, right? But take some time and say, how do I do that? Or how do I understand what's happening now to bring new life and a new orientation?